Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. Your host, a behavioral scientist and bachelor, talks to leading experts and successful singles about living solo and living well. Travel more, make things, sleep in when you want to. Here's the playbook for the person who is unapologetically unattached. Now, please welcome Dr. Peter McGraw.
Welcome back. This episode coincides with Valentine's Day, and you probably can guess how I feel about Valentine's Day. My guest, Lisa Bonos, writes the relationship column for the Washington Post, and we have an enlightening conversation about ghosting, why it happens, how to deal with it, and how to properly break up instead. I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get started. Welcome to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Lisa Bonos. Lisa writes about dating, relationships, friendship, and single life for the Washington Post. She's a native Californian, voracious reader, and amateur competitive punster. She's also responsible for the first media hit for Solo in an article that explores how singles were spending election night. Welcome, Lisa.
Thanks for having me.
So it's really fun doing this podcast because I'm like paying attention to a whole different set of podcasts, books, articles, and in your case, columns that I wouldn't have otherwise. And so we've gotten to know each other through Twitter, some calls, this interview, and so on. And this episode coincides with Valentine's Day. And so rather than talking about the good things about love and relationships, which everybody's focused on for Valentine's Day, I thought we would look at the bad and the ugly. Let's talk a little bit about Valentine's Day. I want to hear what your thinking is about this. So you think a lot about Valentine's Day because you have to write about it. So what are you thinking about when you think about Valentine's Day besides the obvious workload?
Yeah, it is like I say to people that Valentine's Day is like, for me, it's like being an accountant April 15th, right? My busiest workday of the year in 2019. I did a big event with the Washington Post at the Portrait Gallery in DC, where we had a panel and I was doing radio hits before the panel in a small office ahead of time. You know, there's a lot going on.
I want to hear how you think about Valentine's Day because it's something that's part of your work. You write this relationships column. So obviously this is a big day of the year. It's not going to be any surprise to my listeners that I think Valentine's Day is a total farce. Not total farce. It's a farce for most people. But I want to know, you're the expert.
No,
you're more of an expert than I am.
It is a farce. I mean, I think the same. Right? When I started my column, it was actually called Solo-ish, and it was like very similar to kind of what you're doing. It was very focused on single people. And so I really chafed at the idea of having to do a lot of Valentine's Day coverage. Mm-hmm. But in the media world, if you write about dating and relationships, 10, 11 months out of the year, it's hard to get top billing or time on the Washington Post homepage or radio or TV hits or any of that. And so for me, it was a really big opportunity to put love and whatever I was working on front and center. So it's the time of year, I think of it as the time of year when I can showcase my best work and get love and relationships in front of people's faces. But the actual day, it's just a day. It's not that big of a deal. Yeah, I'm sure you feel the same way. And now, because of the pandemic, I think people do care more about relationships 24/7. So that I no longer have that feeling of I have to get all this great content out for Valentine's Day because people do care about this stuff more.
So let's start with that then. Why is it that because of the pandemic, people care more about love and relationships?
Because if you're in a good relationship right now, that might be a huge lifeline that you have. If you're in a bad one, it's probably worse, right? Because you're just with this person all the time. Maybe you're going through a breakup because the relationship wasn't good. We're all so separated from the rest of our loved ones or the rest of our life that it magnifies the relationships where you are seeing somebody in person whether that's friends that you're going on walks with or a romantic partner, I think everything is magnified and it's a bigger deal. And being separated from somebody that you love is harder than it was pre-pandemic. So that's why I think people are thinking about this stuff more, for sure.
Yeah, certainly. And then I think also there's sort of this prominence of intimate relationships because of a lot of the rules and regulations around COVID. So at one point in time, I came across something on Twitter. It was illegal to go on a date in San Francisco. So you could go on a walk with your partner, with your husband or your wife, but two people who weren't related could not be on a walk together in public.
Okay, so that may be the letter of the law, but are police officers going up to people and asking them if they're, so...
No, but however, right, I get that. There's a difference between enforcement and the actual regulation, but regulations, if you live in a building, you and your household partner can maybe able to use the gym or the pool, but a friend can't, right? So there's like this kind of like inner circle that is acceptable. You're allowed to break the COVID distancing and so on for one set of people, but not for some other set of people. And it's because the family unit is so prominent and because the special status that a life partner gets, that it shows up in the rules and regulations around COVID. I agree with you. Police officers are not saying, show me your marriage license.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's been a lonely time for singles. I'm single. I talk to singles all the time for my job. And I remember one conversation with somebody early on in the pandemic. It was writing a story about what it was like to go without physical touch. And this was April or May when I was working on this. It's so hard to remember. And one woman I was speaking to was talking, she was like, I mean, she lives alone and she was really lonely and hadn't touched anyone in, 6 weeks, which sounds like not that long now that we're many months into this. And she was having this real crisis where she was just like, I chose this life for myself and now I'm really miserable. And what does that say about my ability to live alone? Or do I not really want to be single? And all of this stuff that I think a lot of people have been thinking about right now. But I just said to her, I was like, you chose this life because I chose a very similar life. You chose this life under a different set of circumstances, right? You could go into the office and see your friends in the workplace. You could go out afterwards and meet whomever for dinner or drinks. You could go on a date. You could not go on a date. Like, living alone and being single was a very different experience pre-pandemic than it is during the pandemic. And so I just wanted to remind her that she chose this life, but when she chose it, it looked a lot different.
Yeah, and it probably served her well. I mean, I think that there is a lot of mythology around solos for this very reason. Like, solos are not, they may enjoy their solitude, but they're not necessarily loners. They may not have a life partner, but it doesn't mean they don't date, or it doesn't mean that they don't have this big group of friends. It doesn't mean they lack physical touch in their life. It's just this situation. So your column started off focused on solo, and now it's relationships. What caused that transition?
It's partially one of just branding at the Post. We were getting rid of a lot of our sort of personality blog names and coming up with things that were more Google search friendly. And they chose relationships. And I was, even when it was called Solo-ish, I was doing a lot of content on unmarried relationships. So the content that I'm putting out actually hasn't really changed that much. It's just the name associated with it.
I thought a lot about this because it is difficult. Look, in the same way you can't have loud without quiet, you can't have single without partnered. In that sense, that contrast is very real. What I find interesting is the default. And it's something that bothers me now that I pay attention to it, right? It's called marital status or relationship status, where everything is seen through the lens of whatever the norm is, and then the non-normative thing, which is the single side of things.
Yeah, it's part of what bothers me so much of that question. Are you still single?
Yes.
Or why are you still single? Both of those really bother me. I think you get why are you still single on dating apps and things like that, or from people that don't know you very well often. And my retort to that often is that I wouldn't go up to a married person and be like, are you still married? Why are you still married? I've heard your relationship is like really not going well. Why are you still married? It's a loaded question.
It's really bothersome. Yeah, it's at its best, it's meant to be kind of conversational and encouraging. And at worst, it's really backhanded and I think insulting. And it just reveals the bias that comes up time and time again that single people face. One of the other things is it just assumes that everybody's looking for the same thing and that, that they're looking to be partnered. And that's not the case. One of my favorite statistics pulled from a Pew Center research study is half of American adult singles are not interested in dating.
Is that from that most recent survey about how difficult dating has gotten?
Yes, but that statistic is nearly identical to a survey from 10 years ago. So this is not about pandemic. It's not about the changing world.
And the study was done before the pandemic. I know the survey that you're talking about. And I remember that standing out too.
And so it just bothers me that the assumption is, and the problem, of course, is that there is not a conversation around the folks who don't want to date, who don't want a partner. We have Valentine's Day, but we don't have an equivalent. There's Singles Day in Asia, right? November 11th, but it's more of a commerce day than even Valentine's Day in a sense.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone really observes Singles Day, right?
Not here.
I heard about it when I had a column called Soloish, but other than that, I didn't know it was a thing.
Yeah, well, it's big in China. It's coming. It'll be here in the United States eventually because there's product to sell. It's just once Bezos decides to put Singles Day on the front page of Amazon, people will know about it.
Oh, let him know.
He's single.
I just meant, Washington Post, the Bezos Washington Post.
Oh, yeah.
We don't actually, Jeff and I don't talk much.
Not often. Well, that's fine. You're both busy. You have a Valentine's Day column to plan. So why do you think Valentine's Day is a farce?
Because love is not measured in what happens to you on February 14th or not, right? Also for the same reason, it's a little bit, weddings are a little different because they're, literally tailored to professing your love for someone, and you pick the day to do that and the time and place to do that. But even in any given relationship, even if you are partnered, what's to say that what happens on February 14th is any more special than what happens on March 25th when someone's car breaks down in the middle of nowhere and it's raining and they call their partner who then comes and picks them up, or I don't know, or they are able to change their tire themselves because the partner taught them how to do it on a good day or something. The most important times in our lives where people are really showing up for us and we really feel loved or get to give that love. You can't predict when those days will be most of the time.
Yeah, right? So that you're kind in your assessment, in my opinion. But to me, the thing that's bothersome about Valentine's Day is that it makes a few sort of happy couples happy on this general time of year, makes them a little happier and reflecting and expressing gratitude, which I think is really good. And then it just makes a whole lot of people feel really crappy about their current situation. And then, of course, it's also amateur night. It's like the restaurants and the flowers and the chocolate, and it's just the most amateurish way to go about doing relationships, in my opinion.
And I think even if you're in a relationship, someone is destined to be disappointed with how their partner does or doesn't show the requisite amount of affection. You kind of have to talk about what are your expectations, and let's figure out how to make this a special night for the both of us. But without that conversation, I don't really know how it goes well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also have this sort of weird thing that in some ways it sets back feminism a touch also. You're moving your head back and forth.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the explosion of Valentine's Day and all the things that women do to celebrate their female friendships on that day, I think are pretty nice. And that feels pretty feminist to me.
Valentine's Day?
Yeah, you don't know about Valentine's Day? You've never heard of Valentine's Day? It's it comes from Parks and Rec. Yeah, you have to, it's about celebrating your girlfriends, and there's a scene where they're all out to breakfast and something.
And is it on February 14th?
It's the 13th. Yeah.
I see. Interesting.
And so I don't know, on Valentine's Day, I always make, like, if I don't have plans with a boyfriend, I, make plans with girlfriends, or I give my girlfriends cards. My mother always expects a Valentine. She'll send me cards and things. Yeah, I mean, I think if the day should be an expression and celebration of love in all its forms, it has gotten, branded as romantic love, and that's it. But if you can celebrate the other love that you have in your life, which everyone hopefully has, then it can be fun. And I don't think it is feminist or anti-feminist.
Well, okay, so I would say that I agree with you that Valentine's Day clearly is feminist, but it certainly pushes people back into very gendered roles within a heterosexual, kind of normative couple, a heteronormative relationship, I should say.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with a boyfriend. Gosh, this would have been like over a year ago, where he was complaining about an ex like wanting flowers on Valentine's Day and that she didn't get him anything. And so, yeah, there you go.
All right, there we go. All right, well, let's move on. You and I have mildly overlapping perspectives about this, but I also hope you land on a really sizzling set of articles for that day.
I would like you to celebrate Palentine's Day or something. Like, you're missing out.
No, I'm not. You know why? I do that all the time.
Okay.
Like, I don't wait for once a year to tell my guy friends that I love them and that I do special things for them. But okay. I do like the idea that if you could co-opt Valentine's Day to be more about loving relationships and about love in the way that I think love works best, which is a connection between two people and in the moment, rather than this sort of romanticized version of love that we see in Jane Austen novels. I think we all would be better off. And to be able to actually create loving moments with friends, families, family members, and so on, where like Valentine's Day becomes a day where we kind of lean into love in a way that we would normally, I wouldn't be calling it a farce, in that sense. But I want to talk about this sort of, because the focus is on the positive side of it, but anytime there's lots and lots of positive, you're going to find a counterweight to that, and you're going to find some negative. And because around this time, people get reflective, they think about their relationships. They think about the person that they may be trying to cultivate a relationship with. They may be trying to make something of this day, even if it's ill-fitting for their particular relationship. And so it shines a light, on the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the bad and the ugly for a moment, because it matters. The thing about love that I think I find so fascinating is, while the highs can be very high, the lows can be as low. When you think about the negative emotions you've had in your life, moments of heartbreak, are up there with moments of grief in terms of losing loved ones, losing a relationship, losing a romantic partnership in that sense. And let's talk about the sort of mild side of that, which is to be ghosted.
You think that's mild?
Compared to heartbreak, compared to infidelity, compared to divorce.
People ghost one another to get into divorces sometimes. I mean, it's...
What? Well, then let's talk about...
ghosting can happen at any point in a relationship.
So, all right, that's useful. That's useful to hear, because my experience being ghosted is on the mild side of it. I've never had a truly meaningful relationship end by ghosting. And so that reveals my bias. So, okay, well, you're more of an expert than I am. Why are people ghosting? This is something that you've written about, you've clearly thought about, you've had conversations with folks about it. Let's start with the mild version of ghosting, and let's take it all the way up to the initiation into a divorce. Okay.
Well, I think sometimes people ghost one another after a first or second date, right? They might not be interested in going out again. There is some conversation often about, someone will say to me, "Oh, we went on a first or second date, and then I didn't hear from him. He ghosted me." And I was like, well, you also didn't reach out to him. So I don't think anyone ghosted anyone there. It's just mutual decision not to contact one another.
Yes. Well, okay. So I think, let's clarify this, because I think this matters. Yeah.
Ghosting is when one party has reached out to the other or been in contact with the other, whether they're in a relationship or just a couple dates, and the other person just doesn't respond.
Yes. Okay. Because I want to say, I mean, as someone who, as again, getting back to heteronormative gender roles, I do a lot of asking when it comes to dating. And thankfully, I do a lot of asking, because if I didn't, I would never go out on a date. So no one ever asked me out. So
Really?
Yes, never happens. Not never, but almost never. I mean, someone may make it clear that they would want to see me, but I know I don't get asked out. And so after a first date, or as I call it, meeting, after meeting for the first time, if it's not a connection, I usually will send a little thank you, thanks for meeting or something like that. But, but sometimes maybe it's a phone call or something like that. And there are times where I don't respond. I don't send something, you know what I mean? In that kind of sense, I don't consider that ghosting.
I don't either. I think that's a misconception about what equals ghosting, because people have mentioned it to me before.
Yeah. And I actually, part of the reason I don't do it is I think, first of all, it's highly presumptive. And I think it can be mean to send someone a note that just says, hey, thanks for talking. I just don't feel like there's a connection there.
Exactly. Like, I've gotten those notes after first dates, and I'm like, well, yeah, I didn't want to see you again either.
Right.
You don't have to rub it in.
Exactly. So I think
we don't need to talk about it. If we're both on the same page about not seeing each other, and you haven't really been seeing each other that much, I don't think it really requires a discussion. If you've been out several times, you're like in each other's lives, you're in a relationship, then, you kind of need to talk about it.
Yes,
You're
indeed.
going to be adult about it. Yeah. I mean, about a year ago, to give an example like that, about a year ago, I was ghosted by someone I'd been seeing for about like 6 weeks or so. So not like too long, but he had made several overtures about how interested he was in me and how he missed me when I was gone for Thanksgiving and all sorts of things. And we talked about making future plans, like about spending New Year's together and potentially traveling together. So both of us had gotten the flu in mid-December 2019. And, I reached out to check on him and was like, yo, I just got a flu test and I have the flu. How are you doing? Are you okay? Like, you should also get tested, kind of thing. And thankfully this was pre-COVID because that would have not been great. But I never heard from him. I contacted him several times, because the thing about ghosting that I find to be so cruel is you kind of don't know that it's happening right away.
Mm-hmm.
Right? With a breakup, you're like, okay, I may not want to accept this decision, but I can accept and process it. And you can maybe talk to the person and find out why they think things aren't working out, or at least get some answers, even if they're unsatisfactory. Ghosting, it takes a little while for the message to sink in, which I think is the cruelest part. At some point, I think I probably texted once, left a voicemail, texted again, and then we texted a third time. That was basically just like, look, like, I understand if you don't want to see me again, but you could at least like tell me that you're alive.
Right.
And nothing. And he blocked me on all social channels. And we even like met through a mutual friend. I mean, he lives about a mile from me. I don't know if he lives there anymore, but we were kind of the kind of person that you could run into again. And so maybe you might want to have good relations with them, or at least cordial ones, and not leave anyone. Like, it was really, really terrible, especially because I think ghosting often happens. Sometimes it'll happen with somebody who's a bad communicator or who's pretty unreliable. And so maybe that's not so much of a surprise. This person, up until this point, had been really communicative and checking in a lot. And so that surprised me because it seemed really out of character. But I also didn't know him very well. So, and to layer on top of the fact that we were both sick, so I was worried about him. And it was kind of it's pre-COVID. So I had spent like 5 days not leaving my apartment, right? And not really exercising, just like sleeping and eating and watching movies and trying to get better. And in a way, it was sort of like what we're in now. It was kind of quarantine, pre-quarantine. And it was so destabilizing, because I think partly because I wasn't getting outside. I was not going to work. I mean, all those things that I should not have been doing because I wasn't feeling well. But the isolation made the experience of being ghosted, it felt more harsh, I think.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think people ghost?
Well, I mean, I've talked to a lot of therapists about this and dating experts, and even a comedian who was doing a podcast for the dating app Hinge that was about ghosting, where they would take two people that had ghosted one another and make them sit down and talk to each other about what happened. It's pretty fascinating.
Spicy.
Yeah, take a listen. And the podcast also explores like all the reasons people do this. So there's many reasons. Sometimes the person doing it, it's been done to them. And so it's like, well, someone did this to me, so I guess it's okay. And even though it hurt, like I'm going to do it to somebody else because this is what we're doing now, apparently. I mean, the headline on my essay about ghosting, right, was ghosting is normal now. That's completely bonkers.
Mm-hmm.
And it is. So sometimes they do it because it's been done to them. Sometimes people do it because they just don't know how to tell someone this isn't working out. They paradoxically think that having a conversation like that is going to cause the other person more harm and pain than not having it at all. But not having it at all just like leaves so many questions, and also just like not knowing that you're being broken up with, like that pain I think is worse than knowing. And sometimes people do it because they're insecure and they just don't know how to have the conversation. I mean, I think with technology, there's a lot of things where we don't have to have difficult or uncomfortable conversations. A family member calls and invites you to Thanksgiving and you don't want to go, or you don't feel close to them and you don't want to tell them you can't go. So you let it go to voicemail and maybe you send a text. Or someone, I mean, I think the calling, one person calling another person and then the other person defaulting to text a lot is not knowing how to have difficult or uncomfortable conversations. We don't really teach people. There's so much like in pickup culture and even just TV and movies about how to pick people up, right? Like how to approach someone, a pickup line, all of this stuff. There was very little in our culture about saying goodbye.
Yes. And I'm going to get to that in a moment because I want to talk about how to break up, because I think if we're going to look, there are people listening to this who have been ghosted, and there are people listening to this who have ghosted. And I want to go on the record and say, I feel bad for you if you've been ghosted. It's a really aversive experience, and it's aversive. And the fact that it's normalized doesn't make it any easier to take, I think. So it's uncertain rejection, which is really hard to cope with because, the psychological research is very clear. Uncertain things are already tend to be aversive to begin with. Like we prefer certainty over uncertainty. Like uncertain weights are worse than certain weights, for example, even if the uncertain weight ends up being shorter than the certain weight. And then uncertain negative things are especially like it's sort of looming and so on. And so it crowds out other things. It demands our attention and it demands our emotions that are there. And then also, I think, especially if it's a more advanced relationship, even in the one that you described, this is someone that you thought cared about you, liked you in a way. And I think in some ways, a breakup actually can be kind because you have a chance to say how much you appreciate the person and the things that you like about them. But unfortunately, it's not working out for whatever reason. It's not you, it's me, the classic kind of stuff. And so, you have this sort of thing of you have some loss, it's uncertain loss, it drags on, it demands attention in a way that I think is sort of destabilizing and so on. And I do think that it is unfortunate, as you said, that it's sort of been normalized.
Yeah, especially like, I don't know, I felt like a real fool worrying about him. Because I cared about him, but it's really humiliating.
Yeah. And I want to go on the record to say it's not okay to ghost. I think that it's important for people to say that. It's not okay to ghost. Like if you want to date and you want the good parts of dating, then you need to be able to handle the bad parts of dating, which means that you might need to reject someone. And
you do need to. It's a skill. I mean, rejection's a skill that like people have to learn. I mean, I've had even just situations of going on a date or two and not being interested in telling the person. And I often get a response back like, oh my gosh, thank you for telling me that you're not interested.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, the bar is so low for communication out there.
It is true. Now, this is so ghosting in your article. You said the term dates back to like 2006, the earliest sort of notice about, but I think ghosting really became a thing, in the last few years?
Yeah, 2006 sounds early. I mean, I still sometimes use the term on the radio, and radio hosts will be like, "Excuse me, what is that? Explain it."
I see.
So, yeah, and you can use it for for many different things. But yeah,
I have a friend who was nearly ghosted. She was criticized by a date because she took a little while to get back to him about something, I think in part because she was trying to figure out what to say. And then when she finally did, he came back at her and was like, "You nearly ghosted me." And I was like, there's no such thing as nearly ghosting.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I accused someone of that once. Like, are you ghost? Like, I think I was dating someone, but it wasn't really dating. It's hard to tell, right? This is several years ago. I think I left a voicemail and I was like, "I see what you're doing. Can we just like have a call? Can we just like meet up and we can like have the breakup talk," basically, which is what we did. And I accused him of ghosting me and he was like, "I haven't ghosted you. I just like haven't been in touch in 2 weeks." And I'm like, well,
that sort of fits. This was like not even 24 hours in her case.
Oh, so, that's not ghosting. You got to give people a little bit of a buffer here. Life happens, you know?
Yeah. This guy ended up being a jerk anyway. So there's this idea in psychology called an empathy gap. And so I think another reason why ghosting happens is, we're very aware of how we're feeling. And I think to ghost is an act of avoidance, right? And so avoidance is one way that we kind of deal with negative emotions, right? Like, oh, there's that problem. I'm going to procrastinate. I'm going to distract myself. I'm going to do all these things. These sort of emotion-focused coping strategies. Some of them are problem-focused coping strategies. And so avoidance is one, and it can be completely appropriate and useful in some situations. And so when we're undergoing negative emotion, we feel guilty, we're going to let someone down. We're very focused on our emotions, but that other person's emotions is really quite distant oftentimes. And so I think sometimes people ghost, not just because it's sort of they've been ghosted and it's sort of within some hazy sense of normalcy nowadays with text culture especially, but then also we are just less aware and less tuned in to what the ghosting is going to do to them. And that empathy gap, I think, further causes this to be the case. And as I just alluded to, I do think there is something about text culture that allows ghosting to happen, because texting is already more distant than if you were having phone calls all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's very easy to meet someone in a public place, and if you're late, just send a text to say that you're late, right? There's very little pressure to show up on time.
I just was saying that the other day. People are late more often now because they have an easy way to say, "Oh, just running a few minutes late, 10 minutes late, traffic, etc." Where before, for younger listeners, this would happen. You would be sitting there going, "Where is this person?" And so there was a lot of pressure to show up on time because of, again, that uncertainty.
Yeah. I had this friend in 2006 or so living in DC. She was one of these people that like grew up without a TV at home and resisted getting a cell phone for a very long time. So it's like 2006 and Nell doesn't have a cell phone. So I love her dearly, right? But she doesn't like to be plugged in all the time. And you make plans with Nell, you have to show up on time because there's no way to tell her, and you can't call her. There's no way to tell her that you're running late. And I think she is one of these people that is better. Of all of my friends, she's pretty good about staying in touch. I mean, I haven't seen her in years, and I still she sent me a Christmas card this year that is like, has a thoughtful message inside that references the last time we spoke this year, and that she hopes we get to see each other this year, the following year. And sorry, I realize this is February and we're talking about holiday cards, but anyway, I think she's somebody that values relationships, and part of that is showing up on time and like literally showing up in whatever form that is, right?
This is coming at the heels. I did a long series on making remarkable friends. And so the regular listener has been hearing a lot about what good friends do. And it sounds like Nell, even though you don't see her often, is a good friend.
She is.
She's reliable. She meets one of the, I think, important criteria for friendships, which is you can count on them.
Yeah.
They show up when when they say they're going to show up.
Yeah.
So let's finish up the ghosting thing. But let's say that you are being ghosted, right? So you've sent a text, something like that. What happens when it doesn't come back? What is your state of the art advice about how to deal with a situation when you're being ghosted?
I think at first I would advise people not to jump to conclusions, to give people a couple of days. Not immediately think that someone is ghosting you. Because you don't know what's happening. Once it is clear that you're being ghosted, stop reaching out.
Okay.
Do not continue to contact the person or show up on their doorstep or any of those things. Unless, I don't know, you're pregnant, you need to tell them you're having the person's filed. There might be some extenuating circumstances. But if, for all intents and purposes, you can move on with your life, maybe you lost a sweatshirt or something at their place, right, or a book or something, within, I think, within reason, just I would try to process it on your own, because you're not going to, whatever closure you think you're going to get from the other person, you're probably not going to get it. If they've already decided they're not going to have the conversation with you, guilting them into or trying to get the breakup talk out of them when they've already clearly shown you that they're sidestepping it, it's not going to be helpful. So I processed my own ghosting in therapy.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same similarly with other breakups. I think it's similar to cutting off contact with somebody. If somebody does that to you,
Yeah, I do want to say this is a saying that I have, which is I don't want to be with someone who doesn't want to be with me. And I've had to tell myself that in the case of heartbreak. The idea that you want to try to repair this bond, fix this, you don't want to experience this loss. It can be really, quite upsetting, even debilitating, at times. And if this is sort of hoping your cognitions can override your emotions, by reprogramming how you think. But I regularly say to myself, and I say it to other people I care about, you don't want to be with someone who doesn't want to be with you. Moreover, you don't want to be with someone who's going to treat you poorly.
Yeah.
And to ghost someone is to treat someone really poorly.
Yeah.
I just don't. I think it's unacceptable.
Yeah.
To do it.
Yeah.
And so now I have had the great fortune of never having a major ghosting, so to speak. I've never had a sort of someone I dated regularly just disappear on me. I have had dozens of situations where I was, flirting, pursuing, interested in someone. You move from the apps over to text, and you send a text or you leave a voicemail or something like that, and then the person never gets back to you. Now, I'm curious what you're going to. So it sounds to me I should just let this go.
Yeah, I think you let that go. I mean, if you haven't met in person, I think it's hard to call to brand anything as being ghosted. I get that. There's so many app conversations that don't go anywhere, or even that move to text and then don't go anywhere. I don't really think that's ghosting.
It doesn't mean so. Well, whatever version of this is, if you send someone a note, you ask them a question, you say, "Oh, when do you want to talk?" and then they never get back to you. Call it what you want. You know what I mean? The person is disappearing on you. They're not responding to you.
Yeah.
Now, I think one way to do that is you just delete the thread and you just move on.
Yeah.
I don't. I do something else.
What do you do?
I will often just say, hey, Lisa, looks like I've lost your interest. Just want to say, it was nice connecting with you and good luck out there. And so I do put a little, I don't always do it, but I often will just put a little bow on it, tie it up. I just say, I know what you're doing. You know what you're doing. You are now released from this in that sense. And I find it helps me move along because, again, now the uncertainty is gone.
Yeah.
Which, and then for them, if it has one of two effects, I'm comfortable with it. And that is, if they feel less guilty as a result of it, I'm happy. And if it forces them to recognize that they have done this thing, which is mildly rude, I'm okay with that also.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's nice of you to do. I don't know that you need to do it, but I think it's a nice way of saying I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think like also we have so many, I don't know, text threads that can get lost in the shuffle these days when you haven't like met face to face yet. It's hard to tie all of those up, but because I've certainly been guilty of letting conversations on apps just go because I lose interest or I stop using the app or whatever. And the times where I get messages back from men where they're like really angry at me for not responding, and it's like, I don't owe you anything, that doesn't go well. So as long as you're not angry.
No. And by the way, I want to be clear. This is not on the apps. This is via text. Like this person has given me her phone number. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And maybe there had been some communication in that sense. Now, this brings up another question, and this is a conversation I've been having with a friend and listener about the double text. And so she introduced me to this term double texting. And I'm not, call me proud, I'm not a big double texter. And she made the case, her name's Kylie, by the way. Kylie made the case for when double texting might be appropriate. And it goes something like this. You are interested in that person. There's something about their profile or whatever it is, and they never got back to you. And then it's just simply another reach out, with the sense that, people have different. I don't have that many live text message threads going. I don't have that many group text message threads going. I'm a pretty disconnected person. I talk on the phone a lot and so on. And if you are an appealing woman in particular, you are, and you're on the dating apps, you are inundated with messages. As I said, I never get asked out, so I'm not inundated with messages. So everything is outbound for me. But a lot of these ladies, especially, are just, they have a shield up because it's just an onslaught of messages. And so in that way, you might get buried under hundreds of bodies, so to speak. Yeah. And a double text gives you a chance. And most of the time, nothing happens because the person never got back to you. But on occasion, the person says, "Oh, I'm so happy you sent me a note. I've had the flu. I've been busy."
Even like a friend the other day, last week, she was going to bring something over. And I asked like, would this time be good? Or I was going to go to her place. And then I didn't hear back from her. And I looked the next day, she texted me about something else. She was like, "Did you receive my text message last night? I have had some texts that aren't going through." And I was like, "Oh, I see it now, but I didn't see it last night." And I'm like really good about like app messaging, not so much. But if you're like texting with people that I know, I'm usually 97% responsive, right? And so I didn't even see these text messages and she had said, like, she had texted back, I can, come over at this time, or I can come at this time. And I just didn't see it until the next day when she followed up. And I'm like, oh gosh, I didn't see it. So, things like that happen, whether it's somebody in your life or somebody that you want to be in your life, right? You have to give people some room and sometimes it's technology. Right? Sometimes text don't go through. That's
on occasion. Very rarely, but yes, sure. Right there. So a double text avoids that possibility. I think the issue is we never think twice about double texting a friend or family member, or something like that.
I don't think she wrestled with, should I text Lisa? Is she mad at me? Right?
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I think Kylie's point, and again, this is from a heteronormative, traditional sort of gender roles kind of thing, where the man picks and the women chooses, kind of thing. But what her point is, and I get it, is like, if there's someone that you think you're interested in, there's little harm. Don't be too proud, so to speak, to give it a second try. Yeah. But not a third, not a fourth, not a fifth. Don't then slide into their DMs. Also, do you want
to be with someone who can't be bothered to respond to you? That doesn't sound fun.
But I think the issue is when it's just, you're just getting, when you're just a picture on a screen and a 200 character bio, there may be some reason for it. So, but that's sort of adjacent to this conversation about ghosting more generally, because as you would, by your definition of ghosting, which is, much more profound than the way I had thought about ghosting, like the idea that that someone would initiate divorce proceedings by ghosting never crossed my mind. But, now that I hear you saying it, I understand. I get it.
Yeah. I mean, you asked before about how to respond to these things. And one other thing that I thought of that was in that essay was about, okay, so you've been ghosted by somebody, you've gotten over it. When you move into your next relationship, I think it's okay to say, I had an example of a couple in that piece where a woman had been ghosted. She'd been really upset about it when the next person she started dating, she told him, so my last relationship ended by ghosting, and it was really difficult. And I just want to make sure, as we start to get to know each other and date, if this isn't working for you, let's talk about it. I don't want to go through that again. And the therapist that was telling me this story said that they went on to have really good communication after that initial talk about that, and they ended up getting married. And I'm not saying they got married because she said this thing to him up front, and really long, drawn out breakup conversations aren't necessarily easier. The person that I dated after being ghosted, I did tell him that how my last relationship had ended and that I barely felt ready to be dating again, because even months later, I was still hurting from that. And he said early on, I promise you, I'm not going to ghost you. And he didn't. I mean, we had months of conversations about a relationship not working and eventually breaking up. And in the end, and even after we broke up, he wants to be friends. And I had to be give me some space, because he kept contacting me. And that's the other side, the two extremes, not super great. But I think if you can talk about your experience with it, because the thing is, people also take this so personally, and they don't realize that, it is personal, but how common it is. And you don't have to be ashamed of talking about it, because chances are it's happened to the person that you're telling about it too. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry that you had to deal with both of those. I mean, breakups are difficult, whether, almost regardless of how they happen.
Right.
I think that this is actually a good segue into the last thing that I want to talk about, which is how to break up, which I think is important. My last comment about the ghosting thing is, I believe in good behavior when it comes to dating. I strive for it. And I strive, because what happens is people who act badly aren't just hurting that one person, they're actually hurting the dating pool.
Oh, yeah.
In general. And I do believe that matters. And so I've talked about this a number of times on the podcast, and then in my own personal life, is if you're on the apps and someone says, know this, know that, know this, know that, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so if
in their profile, I don't want this, I don't want that. Yes, lots of negativity. Now, I know where that comes from, right? That comes from a person trying to protect themselves. Right. So they're putting up a shield to try to protect themselves. So someone who says no hookups, and you go, okay, I always wonder, I'm what do you mean by no hookups? Exactly. My guess is it's not about being asked for a hookup, but how you get asked and when you get asked and what, what I mean? There's this sort of situation where if you don't behave badly, that benefits the two of you, but it also benefits the greater good, because it takes someone who otherwise would be an appealing partner potentially, because that I don't want no person gets an automatic swipe left from me. Right. And honestly,
because it's just when someone leads with negativity, what do you get?
No, and the obvious response to writing, you can write that same profile that just says looking for something serious, all the positives, the things that you do want, much more effective than just know this, know that, which is so basic. And I can't believe that people haven't figured it out yet.
Well, it shows a little bit of a lack of self-awareness, and at least in terms of, again, it's an empathy gap, right? So you are not putting yourself in the shoes of the person that you're trying to attract. Also, again, it's being done for self-preservation. Yeah. These people are frustrated, they're hurt, they're defensive, and so they think that this is going to do it. I believe in good behavior because it's beneficial not only to the two people involved, but it's beneficial more broadly.
For sure.
In that sense. So Lisa, let's wrap this up by talking about what people should be doing instead of ghosting, and that is breaking up. And you were saying how, people don't get a lot of information about how to get together. They don't get much information, coaching on how to not be together anymore. And so teach me, what is the state of the art of breaking up? How should I be breaking up when I am the breaker rather than the breakee?
Yeah, so it's actually really simple. You sit someone down to talk, right? I think there shouldn't be a lot of lead up to that, right? You can say, can we talk? And the person can maybe know what they're walking into. But, once you've said that you want to talk, say your piece. And I would say what you like about the other person, and then make a clear statement about why and how it's not working for you, and that you need to end the relationship. And I would be firm about that and not leave room, like wiggle room, and then wish the person well in their, search for love. But I want to add on to this that, sometimes when people are in these kind of early stage relationships of like 1 to 3 months or 4 months, like kind of like you're just getting to know each other, and this talk about breaking up shouldn't be like the only conversation that you're having about the status of the relationship, right? Like I've sometimes been taken aback by these breakup conversations, and they seem like they came out of nowhere, or it's like the first time that we're actually sitting down to talk about what is or isn't working in the relationship. And if something's not working that you would like to see if the two of you can maybe improve upon, there are ways to have those conversations before you get to the point of breaking up. Like I'm remembering a breakup of a couple years ago where this guy told me that he thought the relationship wasn't deep enough and he was breaking it off. And we had discussed that once before, but after like our third date. Mm-hmm. And then we hadn't really discussed it again. And this was like 4 months later that he was saying like, yeah, it's still not there. And he said, I'm owning my part in that, but I'm also breaking up with you. And I was kind of taken aback by the whole thing. And so, yeah. And then the most recent breakup I was in, my boyfriend spent 2 months waffling, saying like, you're really great, but something's not really working, but I could be convinced to keep dating you. And so there was a lot of uncertainty. And so I was like, well, let's keep dating then. I see the things that your concerns, and I agree with you, but let's like give it some more time. But we had so many of those conversations that finally, when he decided when he finally broke up with me, and I was like, "Are you sure?" And he said he was sure. I'm like, "Okay." Like we have fully explored this. If it's not working for you, and it was also really stressful for me during times that it wasn't. It was just we kept going. We were talking about it so much that we were just not in the relationship, and so that is the other extreme. And I was really frustrated with him for saying that things weren't working, but he also kind of wanted to stay in it. But like, let's talk about what's not working. I don't know. I mean, I think there is some middle ground there to stating a problem. I think stating a problem, seeing if you can address it, and if things can get better. And if they do, they do. If they don't, like, you move on. But in our culture of like swiping right on every person that comes along, I think, again, in the same way that we're not skilled in breaking up, we're also not really, don't a lot of times come with the skills to discuss problems and see if something can get better. And it doesn't always have to be like, I'm going to default to breaking up. I think like, yeah, in the early stages of a relationship, you're kind of strangers to each other. I don't think it's realistic to expect everything to go perfectly. And you're going to have to talk about things that aren't working for one or both of you.
Yeah, indeed. That's well said. I like this idea. So first of all, my perspective on breaking up is along the same things. Like it's a moment to acknowledge that person's role in your life, the positivity that they brought, what you like about them, and then the however kind of thing, and for it to be clear. But I do think that this is related. Like it shouldn't be the case that breakup should be surprising in a sense, like it shouldn't be like, where is this coming from? So if there is an issue that's causing the breakup, then it should have been discussed in some way, shape, or form. I've had exes say to me, "I'm not surprised this is happening." You know what I mean? I'm sort of surprised you didn't do it earlier. I think these kinds of things. But I think this is related to a theme that I have been discussing at length in the in the podcast, which is we are really bad at asking for what we want. People are very bad at asking for what they want, in part because they're afraid it's going to derail whatever it is that they have.
Yeah.
And so when I always encourage people, ask for what you want, it's the only fair thing to do, because that person now knows what you want and they can decide whether they can give it to you or not give it to you.
Yeah.
In that sense. But it is so hard for us to ask for what we want because, again, we might be disappointed in the answer. We might be embarrassed by what we want, right? So, imagine someone wants a non-monogamous relationship and the world doesn't, generally approve of that.
Yeah.
And then they're afraid to ask for it. But because they're not asking for it, they give themselves no chance to get it in that way.
Or maybe they want monogamy, but they think the other person's not going to want it with them or something like that. I mean, I think there's a lot of questions about monogamy, exclusivity that people make assumptions about and don't actually talk about.
Yeah, there's this sort of don't ask, don't tell situation that people have, especially early on, especially if they're on what I would call the relationship escalator, and so there's that sort of, the relationship escalator allows a period of non-monogamy, but at some point you must be monogamous moving forward. And that usually comes with they call it, the DTR, the define the relationship kind of talk.
But actually, when I talk to dating experts and singles about this, you can have the define the relationship talk doesn't have to be one talk. It can be several conversations where you're kind of asking the other person, what kind of relationship are you looking for? How is this working for you? What do you think, where do you think we're going? I mean, it shouldn't, sometimes it's very obvious, but often it's not.
Yeah, I think breakups are very hard, especially if you're doing them at the right time. So there is a style of breakup that is completely freeing and liberating. And that is, you've now gotten to the very end, the last final straw in a relationship. You break up and you feel so free and elated to be away from this person who, ended up not being good for you. I think that's unfortunate. I think a good breakup actually is bittersweet.
Yeah.
Because what it means is you're doing it early enough where you can still remain fond of that person. You can recognize that they brought good things to this connection, but they didn't bring maybe what you wanted to, or some version of negativity that was or maybe
you weren't a good match and it wasn't making you happy, right? Yeah.
That's right. Or there was something about that person that just wasn't a good fit, in that way. And you probably weren't exactly a good fit for them also. These are hard things to do, especially given the lofty standards that we have for as you move from relationship into some, more long-lasting partnership, at least traditionally so. And I just think that's that's hard. Now, the last thing I want to ask you is I have this particular belief about breakups, and that is when a person tells me that they don't want to see me anymore, to me, it doesn't matter why.
Yeah.
Because I just don't believe I'm getting the full story in any case. And the reason I say that is I've often left out important pieces of information about why I'm breaking up with someone. And the reason I do it is because A, I think it could be unnecessarily cruel to say it. And B, I think it might be something so fundamental about the person that I'm not going to give them that note because I know they're not going to change it. You know what I mean? In that sense. Now, that may be weak of me. I think of it as a little bit compassionate in a sense.
I agree. There are certainly breakups where I've done the same thing.
Yeah.
They don't need to know all the reasons. I think if you have a reason that is something that the other person can't argue with, right? I once broke up with a guy who was moving to Seoul, right, for a job, and I was not moving to Seoul, and I broke up with him. And there were some other reasons why it should probably end, but I didn't need to tell him all of those.
Yeah, I feel that again. So when someone breaks up with me, the three sayings that I say over and over again, two of them have already come up in this, and that one is, you don't want to be with someone who doesn't want to be with you. That's hard. That's actually surprising. It just, when you hear it, it just seems self-evident, but it's very difficult because of these emotions and expectations. The second one is ask for what you want. And most people don't do that because they're afraid they're not going to get it, and they give up the chance to actually get it. And they may be embarrassed to ask for what they want. And then the last one is no means no. You know, when someone doesn't want to be with you, they don't want to be with you. And it doesn't matter why.
Yeah.
You know, because they're not asking you to change at that point. They are, you know, they're saying, I don't want this style of relationship with you as a result of it. Last question, Lisa. You mentioned this thing about trying to remain friends. And what are your thoughts and experiences about that idea of trying to remain friends, broaching that topic, and how to navigate that situation? Because I've done both.
Yeah.
I've done both.
I've done it well and poorly.
Mm-hmm.
Enough to know that the main thing is you need a lot of time in between something romantic and something platonic. The one like litmus test that somebody once told me that was in an essay I wrote about this was that you needed to be able to kind of like talk about, like once you break up with somebody and if you're going to be friends, you need to be comfortable like talking to that person about their love life going forward. Or would you set them up with someone? You don't have to say yes, but you know, maybe you wouldn't want to inflict them in that way on anyone, but you know, maybe you would. And I think even if the breakup is mutual, you still need some time in between.
I completely agree. I completely agree. I think the way you can tell if you've transitioned to friendship is if you're able to talk about other relationships. But I think that you often need a moratorium and some time before you do that. You keep it on the sort of more shallow topical topics, you know what I mean? Things that you share in common outside of that as a way to do it. I actually think that I have very good friends who I previously dated. I have very good friends who I never dated. I have some very good friends that I considered dating but never tried, and I'm glad that I didn't.
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because if you had tried, maybe you wouldn't still be friends.
That's exactly right. Actually, I kicked off the series on friendships with my very good friend, Julie Nervelli, who's a regular guest or guest co-host on here. She was my neighbor, very attractive woman, vivacious, great. We never dated. I'm glad neither of us ever tried to date, because 16 years later, we have this wonderful friendship that who knows if it would have been derailed by the awkwardness of a relationship that didn't go well.
Especially if you live your neighbors, that sort of adds another.
Yeah, but I mean, she moved away. You know, I mean, there were these kinds of things. But the case is, this is like, I think, again, the same things that draws you together with someone intimately are often the same things that you want in intimate friendships, close friendships that are there, right? Someone is appealing, they're trustworthy, they're reliable, they want to lift you up. That, you know, we want that across all of our relationships. We should require that across all of our relationships that are there. So this was good. I hope this gives you a little food for thought as you prepare for yet another farcical Valentine's Day. And I do appreciate your definitions, your perspective. You have clearly thought about a lot of these things as someone who's been writing about this topic for many, many years and talking to people about it. And when you talk to Bezos, I would welcome a singles-related column back in WashPo.
Oh, well, I will relay the message if we ever get to speak. Well, thanks for having me on. This was really fun.
Yeah, Lisa, this is great. I really appreciate your work. I'll have your column and that ghosting article in the exhibits here, and I hope we can do this again.
Sounds great.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Solo, the single person's guide to a remarkable life. For more about our guests and show notes, go to petermcgraw.org. Please subscribe and share with your single friends.